Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Thank you for joining us today for the second installment of our Chicago CEO Series program. To begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor of today's program, who helps bring virtual events and conversations like this to the community and make them possible, especially during these very challenging times. So please, while you settle in, enjoy this video from our presenting sponsor today, KPMG.
Our world is changing fast, and business across the globe have reacted quickly to manage risk and build resilience. For oil and gas, a demand destruction event coupled with geopolitical price war led to a massive oversupply of oil. With oil flooding the market and significant concerns on where to physically store oil, we become witness to massive volatility with historic and unprecedented downturns. For power and utilities, the extent of change far exceeded the assumptions of typical business continuity plans. Power loads saw dramatic reductions as commercial and industrial customers curtail operations and residential customer load increases. And regulators placed moratoriums on late fees and disconnecting services for non-payment. Liquidity in the market has become extremely tight for most players across the energy value chain. Through all this, KPMG has been at the forefront addressing these issues, delivering valuable insights from industry and business leaders to guide you through this uncertain time. The energy industry has proven time and again that it is incredibly resilient. Our new reality will not be a snapback to where we were, but a gradual recovery. New ways of working and innovative digital technologies can help remove the barriers between processes, people, and tools to create a competitive advantage. Together, we can distinguish opportunities from obstacles as the industry reinvents itself to build a future that is sustainable and secure. Let's do this together.
Wonderful. So hopefully you're all settled in now. If you are new to these webinars with us, we're using GoToWebinar. And so just a quick little how-to. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a little orange arrow. If you click on it, that will expand and you have all of your options. So there's a program for today's program. You can see where you can submit questions, and all the information is there for you, and you can pop things out by tapping that little square. And then if you run into any problems at all, just email programs@executivesclub.org and someone will be on hand to assist you. So today we're going to hear from ComEd's CEO, Joe Dominguez, as he shares his thoughts on what it will take to innovate, expand clean energy options, and electrify transportation and other sectors as we emerge from the pandemic. He and Linda will talk about how we address the needs to modernize energy infrastructures and air quality issues in ways that benefit the vulnerable communities that need it most. So facilitating the conversation today is Linda Amonte, who's the Office Managing Principal of Chicago at KPMG. She also serves on the Board of Directors for the Executives Club of Chicago. We're so thankful to have you both here today. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Margaret. Joe, it's so exciting to have you here today with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Per Margaret's setup, we have a lot to talk about. So, and a lot of great topics for everybody. So I want to kick right off with a really interesting starting point for you. So ComEd's customers have really experienced the best ever electric reliability. And it's really improved more than 70% since 2012. So share with the group, how has ComEd achieved the record of reliability, especially really through these challenging times in the pandemic?
Thanks, Linda. Thanks for that question. Thank you for moderating. And Margaret, thanks for allowing us to share some of our perspectives on this. I saw this thing on Facebook the other day, which was this this cup, this mug that had 2020 on it, and on the bottom it had 1 out of 5 stars. Just kind of one of those memes. But it's one of the good things that's happened is, as you said, Linda, our performance this year has been the best in our 100+ year history. It follows a trend over the last few years where we've been investing in the system. Nothing particularly fancy, replacing cables and poles, but adding some exciting distribution automation equipment that help us improve the reliability of the system. And as you noted, we've improved reliability about 70% in the last 8 years, which is fairly incredible. This is a business where if you improve by 1 or 2% at the end of the year, you throw a big holiday party for everybody to celebrate. And so 70% is quite something. We've picked the right things to invest in. We measure the business, all utilities do, against 2 metrics. How often do your customers have an outage? And when you unfortunately do have an outage and our stuff is out in the weather and trees and other things get into it, how long do the outages take to repair? And not only this year are we tracking to the best performance we've ever had, but I think at the end of this year, we'll be the best performing utility in America against those 2 dimensions. And I know that I don't know any other company that's been able to achieve that. Our folks were obviously essential workers in the beginning of the pandemic. And for that, that meant for us about 55% of our field employees stayed out through this entire time. And 45% of our back office folks had to begin working remotely. I know a lot of businesses have dealt with the challenges. To me, we were just talking on this preview, it feels like a decade ago almost since this thing started, but one moment really stands out. In the beginning, we got all of our employees on the telephone together to explain what we knew of the pandemic and the steps ComEd was taking. And, you just think about the uncertainty that existed at that time around how this illness spread and what the right measures were. We didn't have our hands around all the PPE we would need for sure, like everybody else. And we hadn't developed all the processes and procedures that we subsequently have developed. But our field folks understood that in this critical moment, with everything else in flux, we needed to keep the lights on for 4 million families and businesses. Without that, the supermarkets, the hospitals, everything just wouldn't work. And it was cool in the sense that the vibe I got back as CEO from the employee base was, all right, we get it. Where do you want us to show up on Monday? And I just think that's emblematic of the culture we have here at ComEd. It's crusty at times, and as you would expect for a culture of people that deal with the things that we have to deal with, it's a tough culture, but it's performance driven. And at the end of the day, they all believe in the mission, and that's what makes this job so great.
One of the things I also want to note is you also over this time had record customer satisfaction year after year.
Yeah.
So as well as this great record of 70%, you also retained your customer sat through all of that and improved it. So that's just an amazing accomplishment.
It's our customer team figuring out how to provide that premier customer experience. And in this time, that means things like not having disconnects, not charging late fees for customers, making sure that they're available or understand all the available financial programs. That was a huge piece of it. But, Linda, the other thing that's kind of a big accomplishment is our average monthly bill today is less than it was 10 years ago. So you usually don't get better service, 70% improvement in the product you're getting for less money nominally than you spent 10 years ago. So those things are working well, and our customers are appreciating that.
Yeah, and you've really had to pivot, like a lot of organizations, in how you interact with your clients during this time and your customers, right? Like we all have during the pandemic. So well done.
Thank you.
Shifting a bit, if we continue the transition to clean energy, will that threaten the reliable energy businesses and families and what our families have come to enjoy?
Yeah, It's interesting you ask the question that way. And I often hear it asked that way because I think everybody knows as we transition to renewable energy, as an example, wind and solar energy are intermittent. They operate when Mother Nature allows them to operate. So the natural question is, how do you run an electric grid where you have to provide power 24/7 on a reliable basis with sources of power that are intermittent in nature? And there for sure are complicating challenges and engineering problems that we have not just yet solved and are going to require some technologies that'll be developed over the next decade, I think. But the right question to me is, can we not continue this transition to clean energy? And when you think about the storms that we've experienced, in August, we had a derecho storm here in the ComEd service territory, which knocked our socks off. It was the worst storm we have ever had in the history of ComEd, 110-mile-an-hour winds across our service territory. I think people know we had 15 tornadoes land in northern Illinois that particular day. We had 900,000 customers out. In Iowa, next door to us, they had people without power for 2 and 3 weeks. We were able to get the city of Chicago back on completely within a couple of days, and we're able to deal with all of our customers within a handful of days. And that was because of the investments that we made. But when you think about that storm and you think about climate change, what we're seeing is an intensity of storms that where we have massive flooding events where we never saw it before. We have these derecho storms we never saw before. We have polar vortex events in the winter because of the destabilization of the atmospheric winds. And we're seeing record low temperatures. So we keep talking about each one of these things as an anomaly, but the reality is they're harbingers of the weather patterns that we're going to see coming to our region and other places. And my colleagues in the business tend to think about the climate change imperative really being around the coastal cities and flooding and things like that. But it's notable that this derecho storm we just had, NOAA for the federal government calculates the financial impact of storms. And NOAA estimated that this derecho storm caused $7.5 billion in damage. And to put that in context, we had 10 hurricanes strike the continental US this year, and and that derecho storm was more expensive in terms of its damage than all but one of them. Climate change is a reality for the middle part of this country, whether it's a polar vortex, whether it's more flooding events from the rains, or more of these derecho events. We've got to get after it, and we've got to make improvements to the system to make it more resilient, because the reliability numbers we started talking about here are going to be harder and harder to maintain in a risk profile where the storms get more severe.
Yeah, interesting point on that. You talked in your first few statements about reliability, about relying on your culture. And I think when you get to talking about storms and the response to that too, that's very much also relying on your culture. How many people did you have step up of your men and women in your workforce to go out and attack the repairs from that storm? And I believe they were 24/7 for a number of days. And I think that speaks very highly of your culture too.
Yeah, and the short answer is everyone. So when we have a storm event here at ComEd, everyone has what we call storm duty jobs in addition to their day jobs, and sometimes whatever their day job is gets suspended. But it's a all hands on deck activity to restore a system. When you have 900,000 customers out, if you could just imagine waking up the day after a storm like that and trying to survey the system and trying to understand the damage that occurred in different parts, the supplies you're going to need, the transformers, the wires, the whatnot, to fix everything. It literally requires our 6,000 person workforce. And in the case of ComEd, because we're part of a family of companies and other utilities on the East Coast, we're able to leverage those resources as well. And that was the secret sauce here.
Well, we appreciate all of that, and our businesses appreciate all that. I want to shift for a moment. We're going to kind of take to this topic before we get into some of the longer term and the plans and the vision for the future. So there's been a lot of success for ComEd, and you've experienced that across the last couple of years, but you've also really had to navigate some tough situations, Joe. So that includes the announcement of ComEd's deferred prosecution agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office. So just before we continue on to the really fun and exciting and innovative parts of our conversation, talk to us a little bit about what you've taken away from that experience, how you've ensured ComEd operates with the highest commitment to ethics and compliance moving forward.
Yeah, sure. Well, for those folks who you may be one of the only ones that hasn't heard the story, ComEd entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. It relates to historic lobbying practices at the company, hiring practices at the company where we took referrals from a public official, and we didn't handle those referrals properly. When it's not unusual for any company to get recommendations from public officials, and in a company like ComEd that interacts at a local, state, and federal level with public officials, we see that frequently. But it's critically important for us when we get those referrals to make sure that the decisions we make are in the best interest of our company and our customers, and are driven by real needs of our business. And we didn't do that. We messed that up. And as a consequence, we ended up paying a $200 million fine and entered into an agreement where charges will not be brought against the company in the event that we uphold conditions, one of which is to continue to cooperate in the government's investigation. Again, if you're reading the newspapers, that is very active with developments nearly every day. And then the second thing that we have done is we've implemented broad and I think best in class reforms across all of the Exelon family of companies to look at not only hiring referrals, but all of our supply agreements, and make sure that going forward, we act in a manner that begins to regain the public trust that we broke here. Linda, I'm not naive about it. It's going to take a long time, and it's not my words or anybody's words, but how we act and how we behave. Part of that is continuing to deliver the best performance we can and be there for our communities in times of crisis, whether it's a pandemic or a storm, and continue to do those things right. In the policy space, it means taking advantage, frankly, of opportunities like this to share our best information and analytics with our customers and with decision makers and policymakers around energy policy going forward. I think like any other executive in a company, when you run into a problem like this, you immediately start to assess what your solution sets are and what you have at your disposal. And for us, it's the quality of the people we have, and the people we've brought on. We've hired a fellow named David Glockner, who was one of the longest tenured chiefs of the criminal division here in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and also a regional head of the SEC, to oversee our new program, and we're implementing those reforms. My job really is to make sure that the folks that are doing the people's business right now for our customers, keeping the lights on, continue to be focused on those things, and that we continue to drive the company forward as we regain trust.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the openness and transparency there around that. Now, let's jump forward into future. So our energy future, it's clear that there's a transition, right? It's underway, and it's to clean energy. So how do you see the landscape changing here in Illinois?
I think as I observe the policy discussion, there's around clean energy, three things that have happened most recently that I hadn't necessarily witnessed before. One is we understand that part of the issue is pollutants that come from the power sector, the power plants, and transitioning to cleaner sources of energy and maintaining the clean energy advantage that we already have in the state. Part of that is energy efficiency, and likewise, we've been doing that. But as we think about the different sectors, what we've seen is the transportation sector, particularly here in Northern Illinois, now produces more pollution than the power sector. largely because of the efforts we've made to clean up the power sector. And so I think policymakers are beginning to understand that, look, there's this linkage between clean energy production and how you use that clean energy to power transformation in transportation and industrial processes. I think there's a recognition, there's always been a recognition that coal has seen its useful life, but that's more real today than ever. And we're really beginning to have a discussion about how much more do we really want to rely on fossil fuels, period. And then I think the other thing that I'm seeing is a discussion that the top of Illinois looks different than the bottom of Illinois. And so I know I shared some graphs here. I think Emily from your team is pulling them up, but it might make sense to pull those up here. And folks, this will save 1,000 words for you to get a picture of this. Let me just tell you what's on this slide, and but first kind of started out with a basic observation that all of you know probably from your home electricity bill. Our customers use more energy on the whole in the summertime than they do in what we call the shoulder months, March, April, May in the spring, and then likewise October, parts of September, October, and November in the fall. And so what I'm just showing you here is a load graph that is 10,000 megawatts on the left. It's an average week from the ComEd zone in 2019 for April, and that black line represents the aggregate amount of electricity that our 4 million families and businesses are using during that particular week, Sunday through Saturday. And then on the right-hand side, what we're looking at is that same customer base on an average week in July. And a couple differences. Obviously, we're consuming a lot more in July. You can see the average is more like 14,000 megawatts, and it is very spiky in July, and that accounts for the fact that we have a lot of air conditioning use during the day. So what I'm going to do with these slides is just share with you right now where we stand in ComEd, given the sources of energy we have to meet these average 2 weeks. So Emily, let's hit. What you see there is we have already this enormous advantage in terms of baseload nuclear energy that we have in Illinois. We have 10 nuclear units in northern Illinois, 1 in southern Illinois. And the blue shaded area is the amount of our energy that is supplied by nuclear. If we click it again, we have a little bit of fossil energy that we run to balance the system. This is generally coal plants that are running at very, very low levels of output. And then if you click it one more time, what we'll see here is the wind energy output. Illinois has invested billions of dollars in wind energy. And as you can see, the combination of all those sources of energy, we have zero emission energy really to cover the entirety of our demand in the ComEd zone with clean renewables and clean nuclear energy, zero emission nuclear energy, with a tiny bit of fossil energy. Not so much in July. So where we have pollution problems is July. That white area under the load line is when we're producing carbon and when we're producing local pollution in July, and that's made up by right now coal and combined cycle natural gas machines. So right off the bat, what we're looking to do here is fill in this area with more zero emission energy. And one of the things that you observe here readily is that the wind energy output that we get in the shoulder months is relatively large, starts to look like a dual unit nuclear plant for some hours in the spring and the fall, but it really drops off. And Emily, if you click it one more time, you'll kind of see that data output. We could get as much as 2,600 megawatts of output from wind during the course of the spring, but routinely we lose. And this past summer, we lost about 96 to 97% of our wind energy capacity, failed to operate during the highest or the hottest week of July, around July 4th of this year. So when we start to think about technologies, the things that we're thinking about are more solar energy and things that are going to be coincident with load. And one of the challenges I alluded to earlier about meeting all of our demand with renewables is moving this amount of excess clean energy we have in the shoulder months and making it available to us in July and August when we need it. That's not a battery storage problem. If we were trying to solve it with battery storage, it would be about $130 billion solution. So that's the challenging dimension to this. How do we design a system, and we'll eventually replace the nukes? How do we design a system that with resources that, in the case of solar, don't operate at night, in the case of wind, have big seasonal variation? The good news is we're pretty far along. If we go to the next slide, this is kind of an iconic photograph from the 1973 Belmont Stakes, where Secretariat won. We picked it because ComEd likes to call itself Big Red at times, and so was Secretariat. But if you click, Emily, this is kind of where we are right now. ComEd is at 92% clean energy today. So far and away, we're leading the nation in terms of clean energy to match demand. And again, that's by virtue of the fact of our investments in wind energy and the base load nuclear plants we have. California, which often thinks about itself as a leader, is at 46% today, hoping to get to 80% by 2030. I think they'll fall far short. Hawaii, again, thought of as leaders at 28%. And then the issue that I've mentioned to you, Linda, is downstate in Ameren, still a lot of fossil fuels being used down there, and no nuclear support. So we're going to have to think about this differently. And just to kind of bring you full circle about on the matters being discussed in Springfield, if I could pop to the next slide, what I wanted to do is just give you a sense of what this is going to look like in 2030. And I'm just going to give you the April view in 2030 based on our load forecasts. We think energy consumption is going to be relatively flat because of our ability to use energy efficiency to reduce demand. And so there are two proposals in Springfield right now to build incremental renewables, one by the Clean Jobs Coalition, another by the Path to 100. They're a little bit different. And I'm going to do the same thing, and Emily asked you to kind of quickly flip through this. There's your nuclear. We'll all have already lost to retirement some of the nuclear. There's your existing solar or wind. And so if I click again, that's how much incremental new wind are in these legislative proposals. And if we click again, we'll see that's the incremental amount of new solar. And click one more time, Emily, for me, and that'll complete the slide. And so the challenge for us, folks, is that we're going to have way more energy in April than we need. And we'll have to push 17 gigawatts of power outside of Illinois in order to make this system work. Otherwise, we have to shut down the renewables, feather the blades on the wind farms, stop the solar energy resources from producing power. Bad economic outcome, because once you build those machines, the fuel is free, so you want to operate them. And to give you some sense of the magnitude of this, that 17 gigawatts of power we would have to export out of the system is 5 times the amount of power the city of Philadelphia, the next largest city in our region, utilizes. So it's enormous. It would require many, many billions of dollars of transmission lines for us to move that power outside the state. Doesn't make a lot of sense for Illinois customers to build all of that for use in other states. So what it's lent itself to, Linda, is an examination of how do we figure out how to use this clean energy advantage. We know we could get to 100% clean energy. We know we could do that, and this is showing that. We're at 92% today. If we preserve assets and continue to build, we'll do that. But the bigger problem is this. What do we do from an engineering standpoint with the excess power in the spring and the fall? And do you think about that as an engineering problem, or do you think about that as a policy opportunity to help use some of this essentially free energy to power the transformation of the transportation sector and industrial processes? So that's what we're talking to policymakers about, trying to give them a sense of the dimensions of this problem, which is real. I mean, it's real for every utility in America.
Yeah. How do we put to use what we're creating?
Yep.
We'd like to hear your input and your thinking on what does this mean for area businesses, Illinois businesses, and like a lot of folks that are joining us in the audience, large to small? How does it impact them, Joe?
I think it's in both the ways I described, right? So to the extent that they're thinking about supply, rooftop solar, for example, or participation in community solar, it's a great thing, but think about that discussion with other parts of your business. Are you going to provide charging for employees, or are you a business that has, like Amazon, for example, huge fleets of vehicles that could transition to electric? But the thing that, the easiest way we're going to deal with the climate challenge is by reducing demand and by continuing to focus on energy efficiency. We have done a very, very good job of that. But if I'm to be honest, what we have gotten so far is a lot of the low-hanging fruit, the transition to LED bulbs and things like that from the old light bulbs and things we've had. Our next big challenges are to work with businesses to improve their processes, motors and in factories and things like that, to more efficient uses, and likewise in the residential sector with low-income families that traditionally haven't been able to take advantage of all of our energy efficiency programs because sometimes the housing stock is not ready to accept some of those devices. But the business customers, just really encourage them to work with ComEd. We have a lot of energy efficiency programs that meet the needs of large business to small, and also start thinking about how to pair that up with an electric vehicle strategy, if that makes sense for your business.
Yeah, and I think this is becoming also a key imperative for all businesses, right? I know that we're often asking each other what we're doing around sustainability, right? So I think it's going to become even more important for all of us. Let's shift a bit. There's been so much momentum about electrifying transportation. And we just had Amazon last month announce adding 10,000 electric delivery vans. CTA has pledged an all electric bus fleet by 2040. Mm-hmm. So how are you and ComEd gearing up to really power the transportation? And you touched on it a little bit a few minutes ago, but I'd like to drill further into that. How are you supporting that that electrification in our region?
Yeah, so a few things. I want to start off with the fundamentals. You think about what I talked to you about earlier with this derecho storm that took out power for multiple days. I spoke to a CEO of one of the eastern utilities in a state that is just a little bit ahead of us on the electric vehicle transformation, their version of the CTA bus fleets. And what was interesting is when they had a storm, you would expect the places that you hear from and you need to deal with are hospitals, police and fire stations, other essential workers, making sure the lights are on there, and other essential services. But for this CEO, the first call they got was not from a hospital or fire station. The first call they got was from their version of the CTA saying, hey, if the power doesn't come on, we can't charge our buses, we can't run routes. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we understand not only that we're in an evolving landscape where storms are becoming more intense, and therefore we have to continue to invest in reliability just to keep, at the place we're at, but customer expectations for the grid are going to increase as we hang more essential products off, like transportation, off the grid, and we need to be ready for that. The other piece of it and you talked about sustainability, I think is very much a local dimension to this particular problem. We want to lead by example here, and at ComEd, that means that we're going to get to 50% of our vehicles be all electric by 2030. So, and we have a goal of 30% by 2025, so a near term and a longer term goal. But what we started to really look at through this, Linda, is we've again have all this excess energy. How do we put it to use? How do we help our customers build the charging stations and the other things that are going to be part of the critical infrastructure? And how do we do that in a cost-effective way that's tied to all the other reliability investments? So a great deal of work going on there. But the one issue you touched on is sustainability, and I think you covered this, but I want to hit it hard, and I flipped you a slide on this thing. We think about sustainability, or have, and the thing that gets most of the discussion is the climate change discussion. Where are we on Paris Accords? Where are we on the transition to clean energies in the production stack? And it always invites this sometimes friction between the political parties on, whether the science is real, but even if the science is real, are the solution sets the right ones? What does it matter what Chicago does if, the whole country doesn't do it? And what does it matter if India and China aren't leading the way? All of those kinds of discussions that have historically fractured our ability to make progress at a national level. But the thing that we looked at is building off of some work from United Way and others is local air quality issues. And so just very quickly for the folks here, I think many of you have heard that we have dramatically different life expectancies in different neighborhoods in Chicago. And we started to overlay that with air quality data from EPA sensors. And what we started to discover is that, like others, that air quality in areas of Chicago that historically have had low life expectancy is worse by a significant measure than it is in other communities. There are things like fine particulates, these microns of things that people breathe in, are as many as 50% higher in communities of color. And the bus fleets are a big contributor. RHA has done an analysis of that, showing a pretty dramatic increase in asthma and other respiratory illnesses for kids that grow up around CTA bus fleets. So getting at this issue of reducing local air pollution is something that I think we all have to have our heads around. I've been in Chicago for a couple of years now, living here, and I like to kid around that at least 1 year of that has been stuck in traffic in our region. And although that has been less so lately, that's the reality. We have this enormous congestion, and Chicago, as a consequence, has the third worst air quality in the nation in terms of new respiratory health illnesses. This is an area where ComEd could really play a big role in converting some of the heating stock in some of these buildings, some industrial processes, helping CTA and others electrify the fleet and do it in a reliable way. So that's where we're spending a lot of time thinking about that. Certainly embrace the solutions that'll have us build a lot of the infrastructure for people to, from a costless perspective, integrate with the grid.
So Joe, I think I also want to just make note, you and I have both been involved with other organizations, both actually leading and championing 2 initiatives for American Heart Association this year, also noting the impact that this has across so many different health, areas that we're involved with, and how it does impact so many different kind of cross sections of health to that point. Again, back to the businesses on the call with us. So how do they get involved? How do they participate in this transition we're in to kind of electrifying our transportation?
Well, if you're thinking about a transition of your fleet, or you're starting to plan in your business cycle for that sort of work, I would first offer ComEd as a resource through business contacts at ComEd. I think you'd be interested in hearing some of the work we're doing, how we could power different parts of your infrastructure and facilitate charging apparatuses and other things. So have a conversation with us about that. I think keep your eyes on Springfield. I think in the next energy policy issue, if the trend I'm saying is correct, I think we're going to see some incentives and different things for a rapid transformation of the transportation sector to electric, and I think that's going to provide an opportunity for a lot of businesses. When we put all the pieces together, Linda, when we said okay, we could avoid a lot of the transmission lines by keeping this power here, this excess power in the shoulder months problem that I talked about. And when we think about the healthcare benefits, and American Lung Association has recently put out a study on the healthcare savings. What was incredibly powerful for some of their work is that they concluded that about 74 for every gallon of gasoline or diesel we consume as a society, we create about 74 cents of adjacent healthcare impacts. And so you start to think about that, the carbon benefits, and then just the fuel cost savings of using electricity rather than gas at $2.50 or $3 a gallon. And what we see is unlocking a value proposition that looks like about $26 billion net of costs in Northern Illinois. And I know there's a lot of groups that are talking about that in Springfield, but this kind of intersection between the power grid and transportation sector doesn't have to be something that's just another cost. It's another huge opportunity for savings, healthcare, congestion, quality of life, and of course, fuel costs.
Yeah, there's a high return, right, on both of those, uniquely and individually and combined.
Yeah,
right?
Oh, absolutely.
And talking about healthcare, I just want to shift for a moment here to, and health in our current situation. You, as ComEd, are in a unique role where you really support every person, every family, every business, every municipality, and they depend on the service. But it includes a lot of communities that are really under-resourced, and they've been disproportionately hit by the impact of the pandemic. So can you share with us a little bit, how has COVID altered, or has it altered your kind of focus on clean energy right now? Maybe it's accelerated it, right?
Yeah, well, Emily, if you could just go back, what we looked to that last chart you showed, what we saw here is that, not surprisingly, we have lower life expectancies in areas with bad air pollution. We also saw the highest number of COVID-related deaths in these communities, which is kind of a counterfactual, right? Because what we know about COVID is that it disproportionately, from a mortality standpoint, impacts the elderly. So all things being equal, one would assume that the highest percentage of COVID deaths would be in those areas of our city and region with the oldest folks, right? But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing regions with relatively lower level age groups that are disproportionately affected with COVID deaths because the air they're breathing is just bad. It's bad 24/7. Those things we see on TV where we say, the local air quality is unsatisfactory. Well, it's unsatisfactory almost every single day in some of these neighborhoods. And so what it does is, I think, we become kind of, I don't know, we hear these stats and they don't resonate. I think what COVID has done is created a focus on health, on equity and inequities within not only our programmatic support, but inequities like these in terms of the situation people live in, and it reinforces that. At the same time, as you said, Linda, we operate in every community, and one of the things that we want to make sure is that the jobs and the economic opportunities created by this enormous transformation are going to be felt in communities that need jobs and economic opportunities. These are also some of the right places to put community solar farms and things like that, to make sure that we have job programs, to focus all of our customer programs on these communities, make sure that the access points are real. So all of those things are part of uplifting communities. And then how we spend our money. Last year, we invested about $2 billion into the system, and 40% of that was with businesses owned by women and people of color. And we in turn expect those businesses to hire from neighborhoods that have not had economic opportunity. And we've also had a lot of success with those businesses moving into areas where you just haven't seen a lot of business development. So, we touch everything, but equity has to be the lens, much like environmental issues, through which we look at every single thing we do at ComEd. Every sentence we write, every word we utter has to be thought through from an equity lens to ensure that we're providing all of the opportunities to all of our customers. It's the folks that are high income earners and have a big house somewhere in our region and can afford solar panels don't need much help from ComEd. Likewise, those same folks that are going to buy the Tesla S-Class and all of those, they don't need the help from ComEd. It's the school districts, it's the CTA and others that provide mass transit opportunities to all of our communities, and where the air pollution effects of those resources are hardest felt. They're the folks that we need to focus on at ComEd, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
And so, what I captured from that, Joe, was, we have a plan in place for how a more broad set of will ensure that a more broad set of our customers, regardless of the community they're from, have access to the benefits of clean energy and the innovation around that. I also heard you mention our talent coming from our own markets, right, and where we are today. And that, so I'm assuming in that when you make that statement, you actually do believe that we have the talent here to address our energy future.
There's no question we have the talent here. We have some of the best universities in the nation from a professional talent perspective, and everybody knows that. But what we don't necessarily do a good job of is harvesting the talent that we have in underserved communities. And we think about these things in kind of small pieces. We'll start a job training program that'll last 8 or 12 weeks or something like that, and we'll job training a bunch of folks. But we need to think about how that intersects with the educational programs beginning right at the high school level, and if not earlier, to drive. In our case, we focus on STEM education, but how do we drive awareness? How do we ensure that kids stay in school? How do we ensure that we direct kids that are interested into the right trades and get those opportunities? Our linemen could, easily make $150,000 or more a year. They're great jobs, family earning jobs, and they're tough jobs, and they require a great deal of training. We got to continue to do a better job through job training in these neighborhoods. And very, very excited that we're making a lot of progress. I know a lot of other companies are working on it, but we have this talent in our backyard. We know talent exists everywhere.
And you've got such a great focus on you're feeding the pool, right, by these training programs and facilitating, students in school and all of those things. At the same time, then that allows you to have availability of folks coming out the other end of that pipeline, right? That are available for us in our own, in our own state.
It's so cool, Linda. We're, this Saturday we'll have we're doing this stuff remotely. We usually bring in a ton of kids, and we work with Latino and African American kids a lot because those communities need some attention. But we have what we call our Solar Spotlight program, where we're teaching our kids to work with hands-on, and they're building their own solar arrays, and then they're going to build, last year we had a growing kit where they could do some farming, some urban farming with a light powered by solar energy at night. We had mushroom growing and all of that. We're doing something different this year. But the excitement that we see in these kids is just, it's just amazing. And once you pique their interest, then the rest of it is just trying to line up the individuals with the opportunities. We do that right. We don't have to look anyplace else with envy for talent.
Right. Yeah. Couple questions from the audience that have come across that I want to share with you. The first one is can you expand on what businesses can do to drive clean energy adoption, right, and become more energy efficient? So adoption, it sounds like not only within their own four walls, but how do they help drive adoption across our entire set of communities here?
Well, I think it begins with leading by example in terms of your own processes. And as I said, I think there's a lot of opportunities within our energy efficiency programs to do that and get involved in the planning cycle. You know, even for an energy company, I find that, you know, talking to your employees about things like climate change, sometimes leaders want to stay away from a little bit because of the kind of the political friction that discussion typically has. But we've broken through that. Where you have direct access to customers, I think emphasizing that the company is buying zero emission energy, and I'd say, you know, get under the hood a little bit on exactly what you're buying. A lot of times people say, well, I'm buying 100% renewables. What you really are, you might be buying is a credit for energy that was produced in April, and you're using that credit to say that that's the energy that is being delivered in August, and that's not necessarily true. There are more refined products that ensure not only that the energy was produced at some point in time with clean energy sources, but actually was produced in the moment in time that you're using it with clean energy sources. That's an important distinction that's often missed. But I think it's a huge attraction. I think our customers, our employees, our communities all expect us to be working together to lead this transformation, not just from a climate perspective, but increasingly from a local community perspective. And you know, again, I think the energy efficiency, and if you're thinking about electric vehicles, let's start having that discussion now. As all of you know who put business plans together, you think about it now, and if you're lucky 3 or 4 years from now, it starts to happen. But we've got a lot of fine engineers that are thinking about these problems and can help you.
So, Joe, this is a great question. Are there incentives for doing so?
Yes.
For our businesses?
Yes. Yes. So we spend about $350 million a year in a variety of programs, with a large part of that being incentives to help our customers use energy more efficiently. So, you know, it's impossible to cover in the course of our discussion today all of the different opportunities, but reach out to ComEd. We could help you and your business do an energy assessment. And as part of that, we'll have a discussion with you about the incentives that are available to help you save and help you lead on air pollution reduction.
We've got another question here. This is an active group today, which is fantastic. You mentioned that ComEd is committed to playing a role in a future that's cleaner and less dependent on fossil fuels. Can you tell us more about what is ComEd doing to address the effects of climate change?
So the investment strategies we're implementing are ones to address reliability, but we want to co-optimize those strategies at the same time to increase the ability of our grid to integrate solar energy. I talked to you earlier in this presentation about the limitations that we have with wind energy in the summertime here in Illinois, and the need for us to focus, at least in northern Illinois, on more solar energy and storage solutions. So as you could well imagine, when we designed this grid 100 years ago, the working thesis was that we'd have these big central station power plants, and we deliver power one directionally out to customers. That's a very different model than having a system that's smart enough to understand that customers are consumers of electricity during certain times of the day, but also if they have a rooftop solar system, could actually be a producer of electricity that we could then use to support their other customers on the system. Creating that two-way power flow functionality is one of the largest engineering challenges we face. And what that literally means is, to give you some sense of this, we have, as I said, 10 nuclear units in northern Illinois. We know that eventually those units will begin to retire. If we were to cover every rooftop, every residential rooftop in the ComEd service territory that could accommodate a solar system with solar, it would replace one of those 5 dual unit stations. So we're talking about massive amounts of central station energy that need to be replaced over time. And whereas right now the ComEd system is pretty simple, I look out every day, and if the plants are running, we know we're good. In the future, we will replace that one station with devices on 2 million homes, each one of them operating in a different way, each one of them affected by cloud cover, each one of them having to deal with nighttime and all the other issues. So we have to literally be able to measure those 2 million devices and be able to integrate the output into the system. And so a lot of what we're doing, a lot of the pioneering work we've done with the Department of Energy in the Bronzeville neighborhood in Chicago is to demonstrate our ability to use supercomputing power to start being able to harness all of those different devices to be able to replicate what one central station plant does presently, and to be able to do that seamlessly every second of the day. And in fact, every 3 or 4 microseconds of the day, if you want to be completely accurate about it. So that's going to require a different layer of communications infrastructure than we presently have. We can't rely on getting communications off a wire system. We need to use fiber optic technologies, and as I said, other computing power. But to be able to accomplish that which we will, in fact, will be able to accomplish here in Northern Illinois is going to involve a lot of additional investment, but a lot of additional brain power to solve the problems that we face. But we got to solve them. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's not a whether, it's a how.
It's a how, yeah. No isn't the answer, right? I want to make sure we fit in this one last question, and we only have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna keep it short. But it's so important to some of the comments we were making earlier about how we're addressing different communities and improving health and improving life for all across the board. And you talked a little bit about attracting talents and how you're working with the schools to do that. But this is a drill down on that. So I love this. What is ComEd doing to attract opportunity youth to clean energy jobs? And they added, right, youth or young adults over 18 who might not have resources to attend university.
Yeah, so we have a number of trade schools that we support. Dawson is our biggest. We have a construct program that each year, and we've had some great success, takes input probably from 11 different agencies at this point that source students to us, and we provide training in energy. We provide a lot of training in solar energy at this point, but also the work needed to integrate those solar resources, the grid work that you could eventually get a great job at ComEd and other places doing. And so, you know, we have dozens of programs really across school systems to keep kids in school. As I said earlier, try to encourage them at a very young age to see the practical application of some of these technologies and play with it so that they eventually study and learn it. But a big part of it is treating kids that are exactly in that category you just talked about. And if you want to take a look at ComEd's Construct program. It's up on our website and you can find it readily. If you can't, we'll make sure we get you that information. We're always looking for kids that are interested in the program. You know, we have a lot of different tests that people have to pass, aptitude tests that historically have been a barrier. We've done things like hire tutors for kids. We've seen pass rates go from what had been, frankly, to be honest, 15 and 20% pass rates on the math portions of these tests to 60 and 70% pass rates simply by just focusing concentrated attention on kids who are interested in learning and interested in having opportunities. We're treating about 100 kids a year through the Construct program, but as I said, always looking for the right fit for us, because it's got to be kids that really want to work and do well. And we see a placement of over 80% for those kids right now in real jobs. We have a construction worker program, different from the Construct program, which is an entry-level job at ComEd, where we're helping kids get pole climbing schools and other things they need to do to qualify. And then we work with organized labor on feeder pools to these jobs as well. They're great jobs. I just, the thing for me, Linda, is I just know there's so many people that could use these opportunities. Yeah. And each time we place a person, it's a success here at ComEd. but we're really looking at it on a person by person basis. So if you could join me and give us those candidates, we sure will follow through and see if we can make something work. But thanks for the question. It's a great one.
Yeah, that's a great question to end on. So I'm going to wrap us up because we're right up against time. Joe, I want to thank you for not only joining us today, but for your focus on improving our communities and your commitment to all of our communities and our businesses and what you do for our neighborhoods and the work programs you have and all the great civic and philanthropic things that you guys are involved in. It was great to have you here to talk about all these topics today. I think that I go away a lot smarter tomorrow about what, today for tomorrow about what we need to do. Hopefully the rest of the audience too. So appreciate your time and appreciate what you do for our communities every day.
Well, Linda, right back at you. I think if the audience learned anything today, I'm sure they learned they could talk about energy day and night. So this is no hardship. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to have the discussion. We really look forward to being part of the community solution to these problems that we face and great opportunities going forward. So thank you again for moderating the discussion. And Margaret, thanks again for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think we're signing off. Thanks everyone for joining.